you can see for all these different types of sailing vessels, whether they're moving downwind or upwind, the various point on the sail plan that affects it most optimally. So it creates this flow. If you're in upwind or downwind, where you need to be positioning your sails given the structure of the vessel that you have. But the reason for showing it is that if we look at some lines that are a little bit more familiar to us, we can see that these typical kind of J curves that represent our volume, our sales performance, our profitability, and our cash. And we can see the close alignment that if we're pursuing a differentiated customer value proposition in our company, we're going to be affecting that curve. And if we're ending up on a downwind trail from that, we've got to be aware of it and see what we can't do to try to ratchet that back up again. So the flow of learning and the flow of understanding as to where we are in each one of these competencies in running our business is stuff that we need to be aware of as much in practical terms as much as in poetic terms, like showing the lines on a sailboat. As it applies to profitability, that highly communicating culture is going to be central to how efficiently we operate and generate profit from that top line growth that we see. And then finally, as it comes to cash, this cash line, as the Corporate Finance Institute represents most business in a traditional storyline, doesn't come around to benefit us until well after our profits have begun to decline, because now we're not investing in the working capital or in the other requirements of the business, which is freeing up now more cash for us. If we apply this attention to the cash requirements, as I mentioned before, maybe we can bend that curve up where we can use some of that cash to re-infuse and rejuvenate the business as we get to some of those downturns where we're now moving downwind. So there's a practical consequence of applying each to these flow lines of the business. The sixth C is continue, and the discussion about complexity is so key here because the notion is that we've got to be adaptive. The pace of learning has got to be ratcheted up to abnormal levels because what's happening is just so quick. You know, with family businesses, we don't have the same easy option of selling the business off at a point of dissatisfaction or at a peak point in the cycle where we think we can get the most for it. We don't really have that kind of transformation means at our disposal, not easily. These businesses that are publicly traded that are not family-oriented, now mind you, 60% of publicly traded companies in the US are family-owned or operated, so we can't put these in separate islands. But when these businesses have fallen off the commercial gene pool, if you will, 50% of these mortalities are not death as we might think of mortality. They are mergers, they're acquisitions, they are transformations with other businesses that move them to a new phase of life, a new type of organism, if you will, going forward. Not the easy answer for a family business that wants to continue. So we've got to move to some more frame of kind of an in transformation as opposed to an ex transformation. And I'll say more about that shortly. But in terms of reinforcing where things more recently stand, this is the average age at which US public companies are being delisted. And you look at the survivability curve of companies, you can see that as of 2010, and I don't frankly know what it is today, but I can wager with some conviction it's now south of that line, is at 31.6 years, you're into the second generation typically of a family business. If we accept the data that says the CEO lifespan in a family business 24 years, 25 years, in a non-family business 4 to 6, generations are getting longer now because of people aren't having children at the same early age as they did years ago. You might have said 20 to 25 years before for a generation. Now we're in the 25 to 30 range. So we're falling splat into that second generation and having people, leaving, as I say, the commercial gene pool in a hurry. Again, reinforcing some of the need for the actions that we're taking. We understand complex systems to have effects that emerge seemingly out of nowhere. They seem to be unforecastable. They're separated in space and time. Something that happens in the plumbing industry in Bangladesh affects the commercial trading in London, Okay, that's a bit of a stretch, but in many instances, there are great gaps between cause and effect. They tend to be big, they tend to be novel, they tend to be things like 9/11, they tend to be things like AIDS, they tend to be things like those monumental things where you don't know where that came from. And in fact, I refer to this epoch, if you will, as the era of I didn't see that coming, because it's so commonly the case. And what is it that makes for that? Because why isn't it that we dealt with complexity before? Why is it all of a sudden something we're concerned about now? Well, we did have to deal with it before, but its scale and its trajectory is going up for these reasons. There are that many more connections now worldwide. There's that much greater diversity. Your marketplace now includes all points on the global compass, if you will, not just your local market. Interdependent activities, and most crucially, adaptive. So the classic example of a watch, which has diverse components, all connected, interdependent, they all operate with each other. But if something goes wrong with one of the gears or whatnot here, it's kaput, because there's no other adaptive capacity by any other element in it that's going to overcome it, unlike, say, for a human being who loses one of their senses and their other senses pick up the ball, if you will, and compensate for it, as an example of, in biology, of a learning adaptive system. Well, family businesses are complex adaptive systems, and they're operating in complex adaptive marketplaces, in complex adaptive economies, and you can see where the complexity just abounds, and it's what confronts us in the pace of change. We're trained in system thinking to not overreact to the events that are occurring, to not just do these knee-jerk reactions like we discussed before when moving fast into the objective to fix the situation. That's reacting to events. We need to get below the iceberg, the tip of the iceberg, to understand the patterns and trends. Yes, we've got to understand that, but also the structure of the systems in which we're operating. How do the elements behave with one another? What can we know about that before we start making our decisions to move into action? And then finally, and perhaps most importantly, the mental model that we're operating with, the way we see the world. A famous writer once said that we don't see the world as it is, we see the world as we are. And that is reinforcing what it means by having our own lens to apply to what we see. Now this is a method that is not my own. I don't know if anyone familiar with the Cynefin, that's how you pronounce that, Cynefin framework, for trying to cope with this increasingly complex business world we're in, is that we are in one of these systems, or more than one at any one point in time, and we may not always know. In a simple system where cause and effect are fairly obvious, and it is one of the, as the authors of this, ordered systems, where we can understand the relationship of things. It might be accounts payable, it could be order processing, it could be any one of the things where we simply, when something goes wrong, we sense what's going wrong, we categorize what's gone wrong, we put it into a simple model that has worked for us in the past, and then we take action. Fundamentally, what that means is that we use best practice. There's a method already in place for how to solve problems that appear within a simple context, a simple system. In a complicated system, there is cause and effect relationship that we can discern, but we may need some expertise to help us make the connection. So in that sense, in that instance, we sense, analyze, and then respond. So we may have to call in experts, as I say, to figure out where the cause and effect relationship is, but for the most part, we can get at it. You hear a wobble in your car, and you say, I can't figure out what the heck that is. I gotta go take it to somebody who can figure it out for me. Cause and effect's pretty clear. That wobble's coming from somewhere under the car. I get it, but I can't solve it myself. I gotta go to somebody else, as an example. In a complex situation, cause and effect are not easily traced. And you may never actually know what caused what you're experiencing. So here, the impetus from the folks who developed this is to probe, then sense, then respond. And by probe, it means what we said before when we talked about differentiated customer value. We test. We go out with methods to actually see what it is that's happening first. Then from that, we draw our response. And then finally, in the chaotic system, This is what some people would say is infinitely complex. You'll never know the cause and effect relationship. So here the prompting is to act. Take some action. The patient's bleeding. We act. We'll figure out after we've acted just exactly what might be happening here. There's an urgency. We act, and then we assess the response. I think it's useful. The problem, of course, is, though, that it's very hard to know which situation you're in, which one you're in. So what do you do when you don't know exactly what type of system you're involved with? Is to presume here. Get lots of perspectives and input. Test the market situation. Put things on offer to clients and whatnot, and see if the customer reacts to that favorably. That is the type of complex situation and the type of practical thing we can do to deal with complex circumstances for our business. Fourth, and near to final passage action, is to ready the crew. We've built the business, we're competently operating it, we're dealing with all this socioeconomic change and complexity, and now we're entering that phase of life where maybe there's another generation that has an interest. And so readying the crew, if you will, in navigational nautical terms, is upon us next to do. And here, when we recognize once again that the founder-led performance and how it brings us up that arc of our family generational history, if we can find the means to actually propel that same founder-fueled spirit into the second generation and beyond, then we legitimately stand the prospect of refreshing and transforming this business such that the family business gets to stay alive and not follow its death arc. This behavior over time, system archetype, limits to success. Every family business has got some reinforcing action in it and some balancing action where there's resistance. It's something that we could describe as to any one of us in our abilities to change our habits, for example. Let's say that you want to go on a diet, or you want to stop smoking, you want to stop drinking, whatever the case may be. All those things apply here. There's a reinforcing action that says, I got to do this. This is important. It's good for my health. And then there's other ingrained forces within the system that's saying, I'm comfortable where I am. I like these circumstances just fine, and it works in resistance to it. So we've got to explore all the things that represented how it was we got to this successful arc in our business and not move into exploit mode. We've got to continue to move and transfer that love of the business, if you will, into the next generation. So let me just say this one thing about this slide here, is that if we are inducing people to follow us in business and not just simply hiring people to do work or expecting the next generation to be duty-bound to take over responsibility for the business, if we're choosing to give people the chance to choose, then we're building the choice in them to lead within the follower. I'm using a yin-yang example here that says that the seedling within following, the people who get to choose to follow and see leadership, are the people who are likely to end up leading themselves, because they learn from that. They learn from that. A couple of promptings for successors and for founders. As I've said, offer the genuine choice to follow for the next generation. If that means taking jobs and work outside the business, which is often a good strategy, great. But keep them close. Keep them informed on a regular monthly, quarterly basis, information flow as to what's happening, because it is our hope, ultimately, that this good working experience outside the family is going to bring them back in at some point. We can't start from scratch at that point. We need to really create this potential love of the business within them. Give assignments that deeply inform. I have a client that said to me one of the most important things in his taking on a third generation business was he was given a task in an early stage that taught him so much about the business that kind of inculcated his interest and his love for it. So follow that when you can, and the prompting to be known as a family member for your first name and not your last name is a crucial distinction. It sounds kind of cute and coy, but it is sort of key. And my prompting to founders is to die into the business. Don't die out of the business. And this is where we get into the tragedy of succession planning and what have you. That if a founder is choosing to end their time by letting go inside the business, it gives the business that regenerative chance of transforming and to go move back up that arc yet again. The final C is in authenticity. If in fact we expect the next generation to be duty-bound to take over responsibility for the business, we've started that downward spiral. If we don't have the same authentic love and interest in what we're doing in this business, the curve has begun. And so what do we do about that? I think the message to successors is, when you are given the responsibility to lead, follow your interests. Let the things that you're interested in lead you in leading the business. Now, that doesn't mean we can throw out the baby with the bathwater. The current business has provided us with a great deal, and there's success we've enjoyed with it. But are there adjacent businesses that stimulate the interest of the next generation? Are there other businesses that are outside of the normal framework of the family business that we should consider? Does it have to be that the next generation is the one that leads? Or can they also be perhaps doers? Can they be managers within it? Should we find the person who genuinely loves the business doesn't have the same last name? And can we incorporate family members in that fabric without losing the prospective continuity? Because family members can be investors, they can be sponsors, they can be hosts. They don't always necessarily have to be the leader and the person that infuses it with the energy, unless they have the capacity for it. And so this is the challenge, but we have many options. Finally, the last passage is to return to where we've begun. Because although we showed this arc on kind of a linear scale, this is fundamentally a circular flow. If we're going to regenerate the business, we've got to find that same founding spirit and propulsion to move this vessel in the family journey. So we return, we renew, and hopefully we refound the business. Now, there still are businesses, family businesses in the hundreds of years old, in the fifth and sixth generations. Some of them might be in this room for all I know. But the challenges are what we've identified, and perhaps the final answer is that when we know what we know from the founder in the first generation, and we know we expect the next generation to be stewards of this business, can they also be refounders? Can we do everything that we must do to give them the same chance at creation, at putting the love into it, that which is of personal interest that fuels the enterprise? And can we do that in transformation at every transition from generation to generation, such that we allow for a bit of a moving curve over time, but a curve that is different than the one that we traditionally have seen and want to avoid?
Let's summarize the optimal ways of being at each juncture of the 7 C's that are likely to prolong the family business journey. When we are first spurred with the idea of founding a business, we must consciously take on the mantle of leading if we seek to have the choice one day to pass the business on to someone with the same degree of care in the next generation. If we target that which we are in business for as something greater than ourselves, and more likely to garner in time followers who identify with the mission and customers who seek answers from us, we may foster business longevity. We need to be of service beyond the function served by our offerings. We need to be truly collaborative to coordinate action, and we need to operate with a shared understanding of the cash implications of our actions and ensure that we generate a return on work to refuel our efforts. The pace of change is rapid, and we are often in situations where cause and effect are not apparent. So practices that worked before are unlikely to work now. Being adaptive to where we see this occur the most in shifting customer requirements calls for us to be a learning organization. When we have genuinely provided the next generation with the choice to follow and not just obligatory succession, we may find our next authentic leader. And by that I mean being who they really are and doing what they deeply care to do. If the leadership departing has transferred the love of the family business, we may transform the life of the family business. I have identified the passages between the C's as some of the most perilous spaces between. We are wise in each of these to discuss our plans with an experienced and unbiased ally, one who will helpfully challenge our thinking and aid in navigating the way. The first passage, between sufficient care to launch a business and the actual creation of a company, is made achievable when we can envision with precision the 24-month forward reality of our enterprise. Moving from the creation of a company to managing it with competence requires that we do only that which needs to be done to set the standard for others to follow. For the founder to be stuck in do mode is a sure precursor to death mode. The path from competence to continue requires an integrated flow of learning. Leaders are wise to shift away from the traditional need for control and instead foster organizational disciplines that explore exactly where we are and how we got there. The fourth passage calls for leadership to ready the crew for transition. At this stage, it is the single greatest responsibility of the current leader to prepare the way for authentic succession. The new leadership must go beyond stewardship and consider the refounding of the business. Renewing the zeal that launched the journey is the surest way home.
At Newport, what we do is we provide the seasoned advisory service. We've been in many of the same situations with our clients, and we pride ourselves in being able to serve customers facing the challenges that we've talked about today. And whether it is in performance that's required or transformation of the business that's required inside or outside the business, these are areas that we provide our services in the hope of fostering the longevity of family business. And so with that, I encourage you to sail onward, and if we can be of any service, that's great. And with thanks again to John and McLane Middleton for hosting our conversation today. I thank you.